Hello and welcome to the CITL Research and Practice Brief Series. The purpose of this series is to have conversations around the innovative use of technology in special education, early childhood, related services, and leadership personnel preparation programs. Today, we have Dr. Haidee Jackson as our guest expert to share her research and practice on in-service educators' changes in reasoning about technology integration. Dr. Jackson is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Special Education at the University of Texas, Permian Basin. Her research interests include technology integration and the use of motivational strategies within instructional design. Welcome, Dr. Jackson.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So let us just jump into the topic. So what issues are you trying to address through your work?
So in thinking about technology with education, it's constantly changing. There's lots of dynamics. Now we have AI coming on the scene, and the big push is, well, what do we do? Like with educator, preparation, or how do we teach teachers to use technology appropriately so as to make sure students are engaged in active learning and not passive learning. And the problem is if teachers aren't appropriately trained in, thinking about how to integrate technology with effective pedagogy in their practices, what's going to happen is the students are not going to be engaging in critical thinking, that active learning, exploring content, and they're going to be in a passive state of mind. And ultimately, that is not going to be good for facilitating learning, positive learning outcomes, achievement. And all of it, is a mess for us as a society, because especially when you think about AI to add it on to that, like, there's so many teachers and individuals that are worried about over-reliance. Like what happens when students, use these tools and become over-reliant on them? So having these technology integration frameworks and tools to help educators think about, well, when I use this technology, how am I doing this? Is this really supporting a student's needs, etc.?
That's a very important point because technology is evolving very rapidly and it can be a very good tool, but they have both benefits and risk. And if we don't use it properly, it will undermine learning. So I think it's very important to be mindful of the approach. So can you walk us through the framework you use to change in-service educators' reasoning about technology integration?
Yeah, so a project that I worked on with teaching in-service educators, special education teachers, was to introduce them to two frameworks, the UDL framework and then Triple E, which is another framework that it's more focused on K through 12 student engagement. So it's about using technology to enhance instruction and extend learning for the students, like back, like into their home life, like beyond school, and to give them these kinds of tools. And it's a lot of it is about social engagement and strategies. And I can share some resources with you later on about that if you'd like. But so taking these two frameworks and using them in the course to help in-service educators think about how are they going to structure their technology and their tools with effective pedagogy to ensure that that engagement is there, right? That active learning.
That's very cool. I'm pretty sure that the audience will also be interested in learning about your resources. So please share. So how did you integrate the frameworks and technologies to support teachers' reasoning about technology integration?
So this was actually in a Canvas course online, and what we did is we took resources from CAS, IRIS, and the UDL textbook, as well as the Triple E textbook, and kind of just put that into discussions and modules, and had the students had to complete lesson plans using the UDL framework, lesson plans using the Triple E framework, observation forms of actually sitting in classrooms and observing the kind of behavior that they were seeing and identifying UDL practices, Triple E, and just those kinds of things. And then also at the end of this, we're building a toolkit and strategies that they could take with them. And at the end of this, they had to submit a reflection paper asking, how their changes in reasoning or beliefs about technology had changed.
How can we better prepare educators for using these technologies in the field?
I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is to just remember that even though we have all of these tools, there isn't a one size fits all. Like you really have to engage in that instructional design practice and think about, well, what is the environment like in this school, or in this particular area? What are the students like? What kind of tools do they have, or technology do they have access to? And you have to base your planning and the tools that you're going to use based off of that and thinking about the learning goals. So it's not going to be the case that you're just going to identify one technology and you're going to use it forever, right? You're going to constantly, as teachers, need to be thinking, adapting, learning, etc. Like this is not static. It's a continuous growth process. And I think in the past, when we learned how to teach, it was more like, oh, you have these solid strategies, right, for using. But with technology, it becomes kind of overwhelming because there's this and there's that and this, and it can be a bit much for a lot of teachers. So I think kind of approaching it with a sense of thinking about a technology integration framework, going back to basics to kind of structure the teachers thinking, like what are they doing, what is the purpose, what are their learning goals, and how do these particular technologies help meet the learning needs of a student are important.
So it sounds like it'll be very important to figure out the current status of the technology integration and learn about the environment and teachers and students and build all the technology from there and start from there. So what implications do you see for future research and what are some questions we might be asking?
Well, when we think about AI, right, the big one, um, thinking about how we're going to use a technology integration framework to guide that process with pedagogy that addresses ethics and thinking about to avoid bias and all of these kinds of concerns that we are thinking about as educators and scholars. um, that's going to be extremely important. I think understanding how these technological tools, particularly different AI tools, are matched to learning theories is going to be important. And I say that because not all AI tools are going to be based on the same learning theories, or it could potentially be the case that new AI tools will use unknown learning theories that educators are not even familiar with. So, really understanding those learning theories, thinking about the design factors behind these tools, and then really thinking about the individual learning needs of a student and how that particular AI tool can or cannot address it. Like some tools may be more behavioristic, some may be more social constructivistic. So it's just really going to come down to educators being more knowledgeable about learning theory and the evolving background of design and how all of this is going to play out. I think will give them a sense of empowerment and being able to choose and select tools.
Yeah, that makes sense because technology itself is kind of neutral, right? It can be used in a good way or a bad way, but if teachers become very mindful about how to integrate the technology in education, they need to think about like how to teach, like integrating learning theories, be intentional about it. So what
Mm-hmm.
else should teacher preparation programs consider moving forward?
I think yes, going back to a the idea of a contextual approach, consistently evaluating the audience, looking at the environment, looking at the tool, and not thinking in terms of, there's just going to be one and done way of doing things. Like constantly going back, part of the 5-step UDL instructional design practice is, the fifth step is constant reflection, right? And
Mm.
thinking about what went well, what didn't go well by the educator when they plan and implement instruction. So we need to constantly be modeling that and thinking about that in educator preparation. It's a constant reflection and thinking about the use of these technologies and being aware of new technologies that can better support students' needs and variability in the classroom.
Yeah, thinking about all what you just said, like I feel like UDL framework, the technology integration should also be like flexible, iterative, and like thinking about all those things. So are there any specific technologies you would suggest?
There are so many tools. I know I've had teachers just like, oh, I don't know how to manage all of this. And I guess that's the point is I'm not here to offer a particular tool, but here to offer grounding in the sense for educators to think about this. What is the goal of your lesson? What are their learning goals? What learning theory and evidence-based practices and pedagogy are you going to use to help achieve that goal? And then look at the technologies that could support that. So not just grab a technology first, but think about that and use that as a way to ground yourself so you're not lost in a sea of, I don't know what technology to use. Go back to the learning goals, and learning theory is, I think, a really good tip, for teachers.
So, so it's just not about tools. It's about your intention, your goal, and instructional design. Is what I learned from interviewing you today.
Yeah, that's what that's kind of where I'm going with this. I'm thinking about that underlying uh it's really about the underlying philosophical presence of the educator, your values and that human-centered approach where, especially when you're thinking about AI, we have to keep the human at the center of what we're doing. And so the way to do that is not so much to, get understand the technological tools that are out there, but go back to ground. What is the purpose here? Thinking about psychological theory and supporting students' learning, and then go from there and kind of extending and selecting tools.
Always keep human in the loop.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you, Dr. Jackson, for sharing your research on in-service educators' changes in reasoning about technology integration. I really appreciate your time and work and look forward to reading more of your research in the future.
Well, thank you for having me, and it was a pleasure. I enjoyed this discussion.
For more information about CITL research and practice briefs or other resources for teacher and related services personnel preparation, please go to citl.org. Don't forget to follow us on social media, subscribe to our channel, and leave us a message. Thank you all for joining us.